Chapter 11 Part E. My daughter's little outbreak of temper in the boudoir, and her readiness to think herself suspected, appeared to have produced an unfavorable impression on Superintendent Seagrave. It seemed also to dwell a little on his mind, that she had been the last person who saw the diamond at night. When the second questioning was over, my girl came back to me in a frenzy. There was no doubt of it any longer. The police officer had almost as good as told her she was the thief. I could scarcely believe him, taking Mr. Franklin's view, to be quite such an ass as that. But, though he said nothing, the eye with which he looked at my daughter was not a very pleasant eye to see. I laughed it off with poor Penelope, as something too ridiculous to be treated seriously, which it certainly was. Secretly, I am afraid I was foolish enough to be angry too. It was a little trying. It was, indeed. My girl sat down in a corner, with her apron over her head, quite broken-hearted. Foolish of her, you will say. She might have waited till he openly accused her. Well, being a man of just an equal temper, I admit that. Still Mr. Superintendent might have remembered, never mind what he might have remembered. The devil take him. The next and last step in the investigation brought matters, as they say, to a crisis. The officer had an interview, at which I was present, with my lady. After informing her that the diamond must have been taken by somebody in the house, he requested permission for himself and his men to search the servants' rooms and boxes on the spot. My good mistress, like the generous high-bred woman she was, refused to let us be treated like thieves. I will never consent to make such a return as that, she said, for all I owe to the faithful servants who are employed in my house. Mr. Superintendent made his bow, with a look in my direction, which said plainly, "Why employ me, if you are to tie my hands in this way?" As head of the servants, I felt directly that we were bound, in justice to all parties, not to profit by our mistress's generosity. "We gratefully thank your ladyship," I said, "but we ask your permission to do what is right in this matter by giving up our keys. When Gabriel Betteridge sets the example," says I, stopping Superintendent Seagrave at the door, "the rest of the servants will follow, I promise you. There are my keys, to begin with." My lady took me by the hand, and thanked me with the tears in her eyes. Lord, what would I not have given, at that moment, for the privilege of knocking Superintendent Seagrave down? As I had promised for them, the other servants followed my lead, sorely against the grain, of course, but all taking the view that I took. The women were a sight to see, while the police officers were rummaging among their things. The cook looked as if she could grill Mr. Superintendent alive on a furnace, and the other women looked as if they could eat him when he was done. The search over, and no diamond or sign of a diamond being found, of course, anywhere, Superintendent Seagrave retired to my little room to consider with himself what he was to do next. He and his men had now been hours in the house, and had not advanced us 1 inch towards a discovery of how the Moonstone had been taken, or of whom we were to suspect as the thief. While the police officer was still pondering in solitude, I was sent for to see Mr. Franklin in the library. To my unutterable astonishment, just as my hand was on the door, it was suddenly opened from the inside, and out walked Rosanna Spearman. After the library had been swept and cleaned in the morning, neither first nor second housemaid had any business in that room at any later period of the day. I stopped Rosanna Spearman, and charged her with a breach of domestic discipline on the spot. "What might you want in the library at this time of day?" I inquired. "Mr. Franklin Blake dropped one of his rings upstairs," says Rosanna, "and I have been into the library to give it to him." The girl's face was all in a flush as she made me that answer, and she walked away with a toss of her head and a look of self-importance which I was quite at a loss to account for. The proceedings in the house had doubtless upset all the women servants more or less, but none of them had gone clean out of their natural characters, as Rosanna, to all appearance, had now gone out of hers. I found Mr. Franklin writing at the library table. He asked for a conveyance to the railway station the moment I entered the room. The first sound of his voice informed me that we now had the resolute side of him uppermost once more. The man made of cotton had disappeared, and the man made of iron sat before me again. "Going to London, sir?" I asked. "Going to telegraph to London," says Mr. Franklin. "I have convinced my aunt that we must have a cleverer head than Superintendent Seagraves to help us, and I have got her permission to dispatch a telegram to my father. He knows the Chief Commissioner of Police, and the Commissioner can lay his hand on the right man to solve the mystery of the diamond. Talking of mysteries, by the by," says Mr. Franklin, dropping his voice, "I have another word to say to you before you go to the stables. Don't breathe a word of it to anybody as yet, but either Rosanna Spearman's head is not quite right, or I am afraid she knows more about the Moonstone than she ought to know." I can hardly tell whether I was more startled or distressed at hearing him say that. If I had been younger, I might have confessed as much to Mr. Franklin. But when you are old, you acquire one excellent habit. In cases where you don't see your way clearly, you hold your tongue. "She came in here with a ring I dropped in my bedroom," Mr. Franklin went on. "When I had thanked her, of course I expected her to go. Instead of that, she stood opposite to me at the table, looking at me in the oddest manner, half frightened, and half familiar. I couldn't make it out. 'This is a strange thing about the diamond, sir,' she said, in a curiously sudden, headlong way. I said, yes, it was, and wondered what was coming next. Upon my honor, Betteridge, I think she must be wrong in the head. She said, 'They will never find the diamond, sir, will they?' 'No, nor the person who took it, I'll answer for that.' She actually nodded and smiled at me. Before I could ask her what she meant, we heard your step outside. I suppose she was afraid of your catching her here. At any rate, she changed color, and left the room." "What on earth does it mean?" I could not bring myself to tell him the girl's story, even then. It would have been almost as good as telling him that she was the thief. Besides, even if I had made a clean breast of it, and even supposing she was the thief, the reason why she should let out her secret to Mr. Franklin, of all the people in the world, would have been still as far to seek as ever. I can't bear the idea of getting the poor girl into a scrape, merely because she has a flighty way with her, and talks very strangely, Mr. Franklin went on. And yet if she had said to the superintendent what she said to me, fool as he is, I'm afraid. He stopped there, and left the rest unspoken. "The best way, sir," I said, "will be for me to say 2 words privately to my mistress about it at the first opportunity. My lady has a very friendly interest in Rosanna, and the girl may only have been forward and foolish, after all. When there's a mess of any kind in a house, sir, the women servants like to look at the gloomy side. It gives the poor wretches a kind of importance in their own eyes. If there's anybody ill, trust the women for prophesying that the person will die. If it's a jewel lost, trust them for prophesying that it will never be found again." This view, which I am bound to say, I thought a probable view myself, on reflection, seemed to relieve Mr. Franklin mightily. He folded up his telegram, and dismissed the subject. On my way to the stables, to order the pony chaise, I looked in at the servants' hall, where they were at dinner. Rosanna Spearman was not among them. On inquiry, I found that she had been suddenly taken ill, and had gone upstairs to her own room to lie down.